He is roaring as he has never roared in this nation in history. Devil is roaring.
Så ryter
As
djävulen
if he's won victory.
som om han har vunnit seger.
Hi guys, and welcome back to the MissionSweden vlog. Thank you for coming back and wanting to listen to what we have to talk about here. Have you ever heard a sermon that turned your life around? Yeah, I've heard lots of amazing sermons that have impacted me, but there is one that stands out above the others that kind of didn't just change me, but it transformed my goals, my dreams, my ambitions for the future, and it set my wife and I on a completely different journey in life. And I want to talk to you about that sermon today. Here at MissionSweden, we want to think about Sweden through the lens of the gospel. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So anyway, without further ado, let's get on with the video! The little snippet of the clip you saw at the beginning is from a sermon by a guy called David Wilkerson that many of you will probably have heard of before. And about 20 years ago, he came to Stockholm and was invited to come and speak at an evangelical conference that a large Pentecostal evangelical church was running. But the night before he was going to preach the sermon that he'd planned and prepared and he'd written and he was ready to give, the Lord told him he had to prophesy to Sweden, to the evangelical church of Sweden. And now, I'm probably more of a reformed theological persuasion. I have lots of charismatic brothers, lots of Pentecostal brothers, and I am a continuationist, so I believe the gifts continue. But I don't go looking for prophecy. I don't expect to hear them every Sunday in that sense. And if that's you and you're put off by the term prophecy, basically what he does is he takes Amos chapter 3 and he preaches it, and then he applies it incredibly well into the Swedish context. And he humbly starts the sermon, and then he fearlessly proclaims a challenging message to the evangelical church of Sweden. I used to visit Sweden regularly with my fiancée then, Emily, now my wife. But I remember this time I arrived, Emily's dad came to me with a video in his hand, the VHS. He said, "Ben, you must watch this." And I didn't really fancy watching it. I was still in the phase of wanting to impress my father-in-law, so I said, "Oh yeah, I'll watch that." So later on, while there was nobody around, I stuck it in the VHS player and I started to watch it, and it changed my life. And I'm going to play a few snippets from that sermon now, and then respond to them after each section.
The controversy God has with the evangelical church of Sweden is one word, one issue.
Den kontrovers Gud har med den evangeliska kyrkan, det är ett problem.
I give it to you as God gave it to me in one word.
Och jag ger det till er som Gud gav det till mig, ett enda ord.
Apathy.
Apati.
Apathy.
Apati.
And the word that God hears from the lips of the government and the lips from the church is, we are a tolerant people.
Och det Gud liksom hör både från samhällets toppar och från kyrkan är, vi är ett tolerant släkte.
No, he said, you're lukewarm people.
Nej, säger Gud, ni är ljumma.
You tolerate your government to tell you can't speak against homosexuality from your pulpit.
Ni accepterar att regeringen säger att ni inte får tala emot homosexualiteten från era talarstolar.
And no one is falling on their knees and using the weapon of prayer to bring down those strongholds.
Det finns ingen som böjer knä och i bönens kraft bryter ner dessa fästen.
There are no tears, there are no anguish.
Det finns inga tårar, det finns ingen smärta.
Because we evangelicals are tolerant people.
Därför att vi evangeliska kristna, vi är så toleranta.
So here David Wilkerson talks about apathy and tolerance. And these are huge things. And at the time I heard this sermon, and even now, I would say that just rung true. In Sweden, there's this phrase, this word, and you may have heard me talk about it before. I'm sure I'm going to do a video of this sometime in the future. Lagom. Not too much, not too little. Don't go over the top. Don't go under the bottom. Just have just the right amount. How much ice cream do you want? I want a lagom ice cream. What kind of size house do you want? I want a lagom size house. What size car do you want? A lagom size car. What size family do you want? A lagom size family. No, not too much, not too little. And it's great in many, many ways. But when you apply that to the gospel, when you apply that to Jesus Christ, it makes no sense. You cannot be a lagom Christian. You can't say, I don't want too much Jesus, but I don't want too little. That's not the gospel. That is something else. And I think in Sweden, that idea of lagom, that idea of, which is really apathy, has infected the evangelical church in Sweden. I mean, I'd had many conversations with Swedish Christians at this point. I could see the churches were dying, and I'd been to enough church services to hear that the offence of the gospel had been removed. Literally, I remember listening to sermons that would read half of a passage, preach on it about the love of God, and say there's no judgment in God's love, even though the very next part of the passage that they didn't read said that exact same thing. So they were selectively reading the Bible in a way that wouldn't offend anyone, because they wanted to be tolerant. They didn't want to stand out. They didn't want to risk a comfortable life. They just wanted to fit in. And that is so much part of Swedish culture, that you would want to fit in and not stand out and not be offensive. But the truth is, the gospel is an offense. If we don't talk about God's judgment, God's righteous anger at sin, then the cross will make no sense. And I was told a number of times, we don't want to talk about those things. They put people off God's love. And we just want to talk about the positive side of the gospel. But if you only talk about the positive side of the gospel, you have no gospel. The truth is, if you have no bad news, you have no good news. The good news that Jesus died for your sins makes no sense if you don't realize you're a sinner in need of a saviour. And I think one of the things that struck me as I rewatched this video just now was how here in this clip he talks about how a number of years ago the government said to Swedish churches, there are certain passages you are not allowed to apply. You can read them, but don't preach on them. And you can guess what those passages would be talking about: Christian marriage and Christian sexual ethics. And if you do preach on them, you face going to prison. It's not likely to happen at the moment, but legally it could. But the thing is now, 20 years later, it's what started with just not wanting to make a fuss. You don't want to preach around that difficult stuff anyway. Instead, we'll just know in our hearts what we should believe on these things. Now, 20 years later, has led to kind of a domino rally effect of churches, one after another, accepting the redefining marriage, redefining Christian sexual ethics. Just this past week, a large free evangelical church in Örebro, just up Sweden from here, they ran a test vote about whether they would change their position on traditional Christian marriage. And the vote was positive to change it, 80% to 20%. And I would say now that actually that probably fits most of the church. If you were to divide, if you look at the evangelical church in Sweden, I would say 80% of those churches, 80% of those Christians would vote in the same way, and maybe 20 would stand against. So what David Wilkerson is talking about here, 20 years later, is far, far worse.
He is roaring as he has never roared in this nation in history.
Han ryter som man kanske inte har rutit förut i det här landets historia.
And the devil is roaring.
Djävulen ryter.
Because he's come against the church of Jesus Christ.
Han har kommit emot Jesu Kristi kyrka.
And he thinks he is now king of the evangelical movement.
Han tycker att han är härskare nu över den evangeliska rörelsen.
I have gone into the midst of it and I have taken my prey.
Jag har gått in i mitten av dem och tagit mitt byte.
There was not one arrow shot at me. Devil is roaring.
Så ryter djävulen.
As if he's won victory.
Som om han har vunnit seger.
I was in this pulpit in the early 70s, right here where I stand.
Och jag var här i talarstolen tidigt 70-talet, där jag står.
And I saw hundreds of young people burning on fire.
Och jag såg hundratals unga människor som var i brand för Gud.
But a spirit of apathy fell.
Men en ande av håglöshet kom.
Cry for prosperity.
Kanske välståndet.
And now the cry was a good job.
Och så var ropet mera om välstånd och ett välbetalt arbete.
No self-denial.
Inga försakelser längre.
But to get the comfortable house.
Men att få ett bekvämt hus.
And you said, no, the ministry is not for you. You'll be poor the rest of your life.
Nej, bli inte Herrens vittnen och pastorer. Då blir ni fattiga resten av livet.
You didn't want the Nazarite life for your children.
Du vill inte ha Nasirens liv för dina barn.
Folks, we've lost a whole generation.
Vänner, vi har förlorat en hel generation.
Not just in Scandinavia.
Inte bara i Skandinavien.
But all over the world.
Men över hela världen.
This is the bit that really hit me personally. Because one of the things we'd noticed, by coming back to Sweden just a couple of times, was how quickly young people were leaving the church. People that we knew, people that we cared about, people who just a couple of years ago really loved and were passionate about Jesus, who really wanted to live for him, just 2 years later had become disillusioned with the church and had stopped attending. Now, 20 years later, I can look back and I've had a very similar experience to what David Wilkerson is talking about here. We've seen person after person after person after person, young person after young person after young person after young person, leaving the church. When you remove large chunks of the Bible because of offense, and the gospel starts to make no sense, and you tell young people, live for this world, that's exactly what they'll do. Because there's no point in living for that world, that future world that they can't see, taste or touch. And to be honest, they're not sure you believe it exists by the way you live. But it wasn't just thinking about the people that we were seeing then and there, literally walking away from the church. It was also thinking back and looking at some of these older Christians that now we were talking to, that had the comfortable life, that had the car, that had the villa, that had the children and the grandchildren, who 20, 30 years ago were out on the mission field talking to people about Jesus. And then they were told by their family, by their friends, by society, that's nice that you want to do that. But the thing you really need to do first is to settle down, sort out your life, give yourself a nice base to do those things later on in life if you want to, just not now. And they did. And they got comfortable. And they got apathetic. They got lagom. They became tolerant. They became inoffensive Christians and therefore lost all the power of the gospel. And these were people that we knew, that we loved, and it broke our heart, and we started to understand what had gone wrong.
Do you understand what the prophet is saying?
Förstår du vad profeten säger?
He said, if you don't wake up,
Han säger, om du inte
he's
vaknar,
saying, church, if you don't deal with this,
församling, om du inte tar itu med det här,
then it will grow weaker and weaker. Your young people who were once strong will grow weak. They will flee from the house of God.
så kommer församlingen bli svagare och svagare, och ungdomarna kommer att bli svaga och fly från Herrens hus.
There's going to be, the Lord says, a mass exodus.
Det ska vara ett massuttåg, säger Herren.
There has been a mass exodus in the evangelical church in Sweden. I think the statistics say that evangelicals are leaving the Church of Sweden faster than any other place on the planet. I think it's something, statistically, it's something like 3,000 evangelicals a year. And in a small country like this, when the church is so weak, that matters. So that what he said there is exactly what is happening in Sweden.
The antidote for apathy is anguish.
Receptet mot apati, det är nöd.
Not many in the church want to hear that word.
Det är inte många som vill höra det budskapet.
When's the last time you fasted for your country?
När fastade du sist för ditt land?
For your church?
För din församling?
Your children?
För dina barn?
Your marriage?
För ditt äktenskap?
When's the last time?
När var det sist du gjorde det?
Even one day?
En dag, ens till och med en dag bara.
One meal.
Eller en måltid bara.
Yeah, I heard that. He finished his sermon, and I just fell on my knees and I prayed. I cried. I remember physically sobbing. I was so moved by what I'd heard and how it matched with what I'd seen that I really felt like Emily and I needed to come to Sweden. I didn't know at that point what it would look like. I didn't know how we would do it. I had no idea of church planting at that point in history. I just knew that I wanted to be here. If I had to get a job working in McDonald's and just join a local church and in my own little way teach the gospel and talk to people about Jesus, then I would do that. And Emily and I talked about this, we prayed about it, and we decided that we would set it as a goal to come to Sweden. And it took a long time. Emily and I had a lot of growing, a lot of spiritual development to do before we got to the point where we could go. But here we are now, and we are excited to be here. But he's right. The only response to apathy is anguish. I think I need to do some fasting. I think I need to do some more deep praying. And I just want to I want to just say a couple of things by ways of asking you to consider responding to this. Firstly, if you're a Christian living in Sweden, why don't you comment below to tell me whether you agree with the things that David Wilkerson said or some of the things that I've said. And if I've offended you or said something that you don't agree with, then please do challenge below. Or if you agree with it, let me know in the comments. But if you're a Christian anywhere in the world, would you please consider putting Sweden on your list of prayer? Would you fast and pray for Sweden, please? Maybe, I don't know, one day, one meal, a week, or something, just once. Would you pray with me for this nation? That God would stir up Christians in this nation to grab hold of the gospel, to turn away from tolerance and apathy and turn to the gospel of grace, the amazing gospel of Jesus. And I guess there's another third group of people I want to talk to. Maybe you are a Swede who grew up in the evangelical church of Sweden and you know what it's like. And then you moved away to another country and you joined a church somewhere else. And you were discipled well in that church. And you heard a type of preaching that you'd never heard before. And then you've grown in your faith in wonderful ways. I want to ask you to prayerfully consider coming home. Sweden needs its wandering children of God to come home, to encourage and strengthen Christian ministries that are going on here in Sweden. But I'll tell you, there are fledgling ministries. There are some wonderful things going on here in Sweden. There are signs of spiritual life, but they are fragile and weak, and they need scaffolding. So if that's you, please consider coming home. I'd happily do my best to help you find a strong spiritual home. We need you. Come to Gothenburg. Join what we're doing. Let's care for one another. Let's grow together for Jesus. Or maybe you're not Swedish and you're watching this and the Lord is stirring your heart like He stirred mine. Would you consider coming to Sweden? Would you consider laying down everything and taking the gospel to a place not where it's never been heard before, but to where it's almost all but been forgotten? Thank you for watching this far into the video. Kind of rattled on a fair long time with this one. This was a bit of an emotional ride for me watching it. If you'd like to watch the whole of the video, the David Wilkerson video, I've put a link in the description. If you like this kind of content and you want to continually think through Sweden in the lens of the gospel, and you want to think about how you can share the gospel in Swedish culture, please do like, comment and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to catching up with you again in a week or two. God bless you. Hej då!